My name is Pratyush, and today I'm joined by my colleague Arushi. We will be co-moderating the session for today. We at Speaker Series India Berkeley would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you for joining the event. Since some of you might be new to our organization, I would like to give you a short introduction about ourselves before we begin. Speaker Series India Berkeley is a forum where we invite speakers from political, social activism, and cultural spectrum of India to engage with the Berkeley community in issues which have direct impact on the lives of 1.3 billion people. In the past, members associated with our organization have hosted eminent speakers like Shashi Tharoor, Rahul Gandhi, Omar Abdullah, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, and noted journalist Ravish Kumar, Javed Akhtar, Boman Irani, and many others. Speaker Series India at Berkeley came together with the aim of bringing perspectives from India's multicolored cultural spectrum. We wanted to create a safe space for open discourse between individuals from various fields and the Berkeley community. In order for us to grow as individuals and a society, it is important for the campus to host individuals and speakers with different political ideologies. Despite the differing beliefs of some of our guests, to many members of the campus community, our events aim to provide the opportunity for community members to respond thoughtfully, ask for evidence to support various ideologies, and open a channel for free and respectful discourse. In this spirit, we encourage audience participation in this event as well. You can send in questions in the Q&A box if you have any, and we shall entertain those towards the end. Carrying forward our legacy of inviting leaders from every sector, today we have a prominent voice of the Indian government and the Union Minister for Women and Child Development amongst us. I would now like to request my colleague Arushi to introduce our speaker for the day.
Thank you, Pratyush. SSIB is honored to welcome Mrs. Smriti Irani, one of the most powerful voices in the Indian government and a cherished persona in the film industry. Mrs. Smriti Irani is the current Union Minister of Women and Child Development. She has previously held positions such as the Human Resource Development Minister, the National Secretary for the Bharatiya Janata Party, and so on. I would also like to add that this is the first time SSIB is hosting a sitting Union Minister. So thank you so much, ma'am, for taking out the time and being with us here today. I'm pretty sure all of us as students really want to know what happens behind the scenes as a member of the cabinet and are super interested in learning more about your work. I'd also like to thank the audience for being here with us today as we decode Mrs. Irani's vision for India, her policies to promote women empowerment, and to take on major political issues. Over to Pratyush for the questions. Or actually, I have an opening question for Mrs. Irani. So, Mrs. Irani, you've had quite a journey before joining politics as an actress. You've been an author, you've been a director, but your most prominent work is obviously as a politician. What was that one political issue or that one policy that prompted you to join politics? And additionally, in your current capacity, do you feel that you've been able to address that issue and are you satisfied with what you've achieved so far?
Thank you, Arushi. I think the opening remarks by Pratyush is something that needs a little bit of comment and reflection from me. It is a matter of great delight and pride that India at Berkeley today celebrates multiple voices from India. It is to be said that one of the hallmarks of our democracy is that irrespective of differences ideology that we hold politically in our polity, we do resolve to ensure that India comes first. So the fact that today India at Berkeley is hosting an individual who's representative of the so-called conservative right is something that I cherish, because I'm sure that there are many questions that, if addressed, can answer many questions that people possibly have put to individuals like Pratyush and you, Arushi. What is that one issue that prompted me to become an administrator and a policymaker? I had the privilege of being the USAID ambassador to India for the WHO program on the ORS solution, which addressed the issue of diarrhea and diarrhea deaths amongst children. And in those 2 years of my service as a USAID ambassador to India, I had the privilege of looking at health systems up close from the gender perspective and from the child perspective. I recognize that though civil society is extremely well-meaning and goes back and beyond with their services, what needs to be done is to address the gaps within the administrative system that will help make our systems more responsive to civilian needs. And post that, in the Bharatiya Janata Party, my political organization, I had the privilege of also serving once as the national president of the women's wing. Many issues with regards to gender came up in my service in the organization that I had the privilege of working for. One was the Permanent Commission for Women in the Indian Army. And at that time, I was in the opposition. Today, it is heartening for me to see that the Honorable Prime Minister made that one of his initial decisions, that women are to be given permanent commissions in the Indian Armed Forces. And I think that when you talk about how much of the issues that I saw on the ground have been addressed by me as a minister, I've again had the proud privilege of serving as Minister Education in our country. I've had the privilege of serving in the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. I've had the privilege of serving now as a Minister Women and Child Welfare. And through my journey as a political and social activist, the issues that came up today, at least, I've had the opportunity of addressing them through policy. India runs the largest nutrition program for pregnant lactating mothers and children below the age of 6 in the world. We have close to 90 million such children and women that we service through this administrative branch of government. There is a daily monitoring and service delivery mechanism that I have, again, the privilege of presiding over through this ministry. There are issues with regards to women's safety and security under the aegis of the Nirbhaya Fund that I have the privilege of monitoring through the ministry. And also with respect to child welfare, issues such as addressing children who are either victims of crime or children who are in need of protection of law. These are issues that I have the opportunity of servicing through the ministry. So the 20 years that I have spent in the grassroots, I spend now in addressing those very challenges through proffering administrative solutions.
Thank you for sharing those experiences, Ms. Irani. We certainly have seen you play out as a minister in a lot of different ministries, and I'm sure your experiences would have been very different. But what stuck to me was the first thing that you mentioned about how democracy is about celebrating different voices, how it's about bringing these unique voices and hearing them, because that's what makes India particularly a very vibrant country. So my first question to you would be, free speech at Berkeley is one of our most cherished values. It is both a part of our legacy as the home to the free speech movement, as well as the center to our mission. However, we acknowledge it isn't a lived reality for billions around the world. What are your opinions about free speech, specifically at campuses and universities? Maybe if you would like to share something, pulling in from your experiences as an HRD minister.
I will only say this, that free speech, yes, comes with a modicum of responsibility. Our freedom entrusts us with the process of respecting multiple views, with providing platforms so that everybody has a say, and with ensuring that such deliberations are met with mutual respect. One cannot say that free speech is my way or the highway. One cannot presume a prejudice and not leave room for either introspection, reflection, or for that matter, conversation that brings more clarity. Free speech does not enable you to ensure that everybody toes your line. In fact, it gives you an environment where people, irrespective of their ideologies, their thought processes, their backgrounds, their beliefs, can agree to disagree respectfully. I think that why only campuses, in colleges and universities? Free speech, and the very idea of it, begins from our families, from our school systems, and from society at large. To say that government can conform you to the very idea of free speech is an oxymoron unto itself. The idea of governance is to facilitate free speech, is to protect free speech, and is to enable constitutional responsibilities. But the very idea of free speech thrives because society desires it so. So I think today, if you look at political speech, irrespective of nations, it is becoming more and more structured and siloed. The very idea of free speech is that we break those norms and structures of conversations. We break those silos. and we break those needs or desires that are thrust upon individuals to conform to a particular view. There is, again, I think, one of the greatest misrepresentations of the fact that free speech is only right of those who claim to be liberal. The fact that you pronounce a cancel culture itself means that you seek to throttle free speech. So I think that free speech is something that governance can facilitate, but primarily is the responsibility of individuals and society at large. Wherever societies and individuals have been desirous of it, free speech has thrived. India is from a civilizational point of view, one such nation. Pratyush, when you look about the gender context in free speech, there is a presumption in the West that Indian women are subjugated to a manly will when it comes to speech. However, if you look at us historically and from a civilizational perspective, those who have had an interest in Indology will know that one of our most celebrated philosophers, Shankaracharya, when he was in a debate on scriptures with a man and the man lost, his wife stood up and challenged that spiritual being in our country, saying that I am his better half. Till such time you do not defeat me, do not consider the man of my house defeated. The fact that this was how debates were conducted in our country is, I think, one of the greatest examples of how speech has thrived freely in our country through spiritual discourse, through philosophical discourse, in literature, or for that matter today in polity as well.
For sure. Thanks for sharing that. One thing that stood out to me was the importance of agreeing to disagree. I think that is how we learn and just become better versions of ourselves, specifically when I see that as a student. Um, Free speech also entails being able to criticize the government freely and being able to highlight the shortcomings. What do you think has the current government done to facilitate such engagement, to take in the criticism, just to incorporate and understand what are the people feeling? Because at the end, the role of the government is to serve, hear those criticism, and probably change in the way that serves them better.
I think one of the greatest levelers when it comes to ideation has been the use of technology. In the year 2014, the Honorable Prime Minister started a digital platform for engagement with citizens on policy issue and policy making, namely the MyGov platform. I remember at that time I was Minister Education, and our education policy had not been revised for 3 decades. And I still remember I went up to the Honorable Prime Minister and I said that for too long our education policies have been made in the national capital by a few politicians and a few bureaucrats. The stakeholders have never been spoken to. The Prime Minister directed us to ensure that every stakeholder is listened to and their visions, their views or suggestions are incorporated. And if there is criticism, constructively so, then we need to reflect on that criticism and take that as a policy measure that can course correct anomalies of the past. I'm extremely happy to share with you, Pratyush, that we have over 225,000 village education councils that had never been leveraged in the history of our democracy to bring forth an education policy. We reached out to these 225,000 village education councils and asked them, tell us, what should education be like for your children, your families? Additionally, we went to every district in our country, every block in our country, which is a subunit of a district. And we asked stakeholders, which included students, teachers, faculty members, those who are chancellors of universities, those who administratively run colleges, schools, apart from district administration, that come forth, including parent-teacher organizations, come forth and tell us what should the education policy for your country be like. It took us 2 years, but finally, after 30 years, when we had a new education policy, it was not majorly criticized by our either political so-called opponents or for that matter, people at large, because we used an intensive 2 years of deliberation and took in views of every individual, not only individual who politically mattered in the capital. This included former education ministers. This included members of parliament, members of legislative assemblies. So it is not as though we in government devised a policy in absentia of the opposition. One of the speakers that you had earlier, as you said, Shashi Tharoor or Kapil Sibal, all of them had an opportunity to reflect and to contribute to the education policy. Now, you would not presume so if you looked at us from a news point of view in Berkeley. You would presume us to be daggers drawn with it. In fact, even Mr. Rahul Gandhi is in receipt of communication from me, saying if you have anything to contribute to the education policy, do write and let me know. Now, it is dependent on that so-called opponent, whether they still want to set aside political differences and contribute to nation building. So from the standing committee onwards to all heads of state governments and education ministers, we saw a cohesive participation. That, I think, is one of the finest examples of how we came together as Indians to make a policy that matters, to build India for the future.
Thanks for sharing that experience. It seems unsettlingly new to hear about stories of like the large political background leaders all working together to draft a policy like this. Before I hand it over to Arushi, my last question would related to the free speech would be, what are your opinions on student activists and leaders getting arrested under the UAPA, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which makes it nearly impossible to get bail just because they protest against certain policies and laws that they do not agree with that the government brings? International rights groups such as Amnesty, Human Rights Watch, and Frontline Defenders criticize their arrest and accuse Prime Minister Modi's government of cracking down on dissent. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, we've had many political baiters, Pratyush. In fact, people who position themselves as neutral voices went on to fight elections on the very premise of how they colored the discourse. Now, in a democracy, you have a right to fight an election. The fact that they lost the election, overwhelmingly so, indicates what the citizens at large think about them. But let me give you a very, with all due apologies, inhuman comparative. There was a recent unfortunate subway shooting in the United States of America. The person who was apprehended for this shooting must have had a vocation. Now, would you claim that the state is bringing down heavily all the tenets of justice on a particular category of profession? Or would you say that you have the state responding as per due process of law against somebody who's broken the law? So I think that it is very easy to take a position which favors you while you have broken the law. For instance, I famously heard of somebody who is currently accused of embezzlement and financial fraud, claiming that, it's not much money to defraud the Indian people of, and then claim to be a victim of the Modi government. So I can only be proud of the fact that there is a due process of law, and the due process of law ensures in India that if you are victimized and the truth is on your side, then the law will ensure justice. So we need to differentiate between those who have actively broken the law and those who want to voice their opinions on issues of public interest. Like I said, democracy is a great leveler of law, and democracy ensures that people who have a stand against the government have an equal opportunity to go on and fight an election against those very government representatives. The fact that they lose overwhelmingly tells you where they stand societally, not politically, societally, because it's the citizens' response to them which shows that the Bharatiya Janata Party's representatives is victorious over such voices. So would you say that the citizen is not wise enough to distinguish? Not so.
Thank you so much for those answers. But I'd like to revisit your first question where you spoke about how issues revolving women's safety and health have always inspired you. When we talk about women, politics, and religion, it often becomes a very sensitive issue, considering the numerous controversies around it. For instance, most recently, the issue of allowing menstruating women into the Sabrimala temple's sanctum sanctorum. I'd like to know what are your opinions on the particular issue, and most importantly, how do we find a balance between respecting religious beliefs and challenging regressive religion beliefs?
We, as the Hindu community, have legislatively ensured that sati is banned. We, as the Hindu community, have legislatively embraced the fact that the dowry system needs to not only be abolished, but those who indulge in dowry systems need to be punished. We in the Hindu community have ensured that there is respect for all religions, but I am Arushi married to a Zoroastrian, a Parsi. My surname Irani is indicative of it. Now, you've today welcomed me as a cabinet minister. However, I am disbarred from entering a Parsi fire temple. Would that mean that my rights as a free woman are stifled? No, that means that the Constitution guarantees the Parsi community the right to exhibit, to explore, and to implement their own religious order as they deem fit. If I break into such a temple, or if I transgress into such a temple, then can I claim that to be my right alone and disrespect the right of the Zoroastrian community? That is what one needs to reflect upon. I am a member of the majority community married into a minority and a micro minority community. Do I, by the very force of my community, break the tenets that are religiously held special by the Zoroastrian community? Not at all. So that is why I said the complexity of our cultural diversity is well addressed by the Constitution.
Thank you for those points. We're talking about regressive practices. Another thing that I would like to talk about is your stance on same-sex marriages. And not only your stance, but what does your party also think about the recent laws or the recent controversy surrounding same-sex marriage?
I think you have to explore the fact that it is my government that decriminalized such relationships. That is something that possibly is not a matter of great conversation at the Berkeley campus. In fact, by pronouncing 2-3 issues, maybe if you explore those issues, you may find that those who try to taint us or paint us as ultra conservative may find themselves to be in a kind of a paradoxical situation. For instance, Arushi, currently the issue of abortion is a huge topic of conversation in the United States of America. We in India, since the 1960s, had a policy issue which was pending, which was with regards to the 26 weeks of, let's say, paid work given, casual leave given to women who wanted to accrue of maternity benefits. Now, 26 weeks of paid leave is not applicable currently in the country you sit and converse with me in, but it is applicable in India. Medical termination of pregnancy at 24 weeks is a legislative decision taken by the Prime Minister and the Parliament of India. And what brings me great solace is that when the decision on medical termination of pregnancy at 24 weeks was taken, not a single Indian man spoke against it. So one would presume that the agenda of medical termination of pregnancy at 24 weeks will not be a conservative agenda or a rightist agenda in India. However, that was a decision taken not by the Congress party, but by the BJP in government. The menstrual hygiene protocol in our country administratively was established for the first time by Prime Minister Modi. Now, you claim that he is a rightist, a conservative, a nationalist. How come the liberals never took the pains to deliver these instruments of justice to women in our country. The fact that the Prime Minister ensured that in the past 8 years, 110 million toilets were made for women. Those who claim to be liberals, why is it that they go absolutely scot-free and never answer to the fact that why were 110 million Indians living without a basic facility like a toilet? Prime Minister Modi became the first Prime Minister, let alone man or woman, to stand from the ramparts of the Red Fort and say that now we are ensuring that women in our country have access to sanitary pads at 1 rupees. Why was that not done when the so-called liberals were in the corridors of power? Ayushman Bharat, Arushi, is one of the most comprehensive, expansive medical health programs in the world. The Prime Minister's services close to 100 million families in 25,000 hospitals across India, including 1 lakh wellness centers, where 1,200 various diseases, illnesses, surgeries can be undertaken at the cost of the Indian treasury. And today, if you look at it from a female perspective, and if you look back at the history of debate and deliberation, maybe at Berkeley, you will find that many in the West thought that issues like breast cancer and cancer of the cervix are not issues which are openly spoken about in India. They may be culturally taboo, but that is not the case. The Ayushman Bharat Yojana ensured that the footfall of women across all these hospital systems saw a surge because they were getting free medical support from the government of India. 450 million footfalls of only women across all these medical establishments in the country for the past 2 years, of which 70 million got themselves checked for the cancer of the cervix and breast cancer and got themselves treated. Now, these numbers have been individually and digitally been ensured. And I think that speaks volumes about what the BJP and its ideology stands for. Today, if you look at the post-COVID situation in nations across the world, if you remember, Arushi, and I'm sure Pratyush can also reflect on this, when the pandemic started, everybody in the West spoke about what would the poor Indian do? How will they survive? You have seen scenes after scenes from countries where people are literally screaming from their buildings, hoping and being directed to survive on frugal meals. And here in India, we've had doorstep delivery of free food gains for the past 25 months to 800 million Indians. Now that is a mammoth task administratively, but it's the hallmark of the collaboration that the government of India has ensued with state governments, which includes Congress state governments. The fact that when we were giving out free vaccines to our citizens, we were not doing it on chits of paper. We were digitally delivering vaccine doses. 1.83 billion vaccine doses delivered to Indians free of cost, of which 6 million frontline workers are women. And the frontline warriors of COVID have seen female doctors, nurses, and frontline workers come together. I had the privilege of being the textile minister when the pandemic hit. We did not produce a single PPE suit in our country. Imagine those liberals that people speak of. In 70 years of our independence, they could not produce one single PPE kit or unit in our country. And in a pandemic where there was a global lockdown, from 0 companies, we went to 1,100 companies in a global lockdown with no machines, no raw material, turned around our manufacturing systems. In 3 months, we became the 2nd largest exporters in the world, which means India has much potential. What it lacked was a collaborative government. And that is what we are proud to serve as today.
Those are insightful comments about women's health, women's hygiene, but any conversation regarding women's empowerment is not complete without talking about women's safety in India. We don't need to go over the statistics. The most recent stats from our national capital highlighted that there's a 21% increase in rape cases, and there are 5 rape cases reported every day.
That is old data, Arushi. Firstly, my apologies, but you speak of old data. Secondly, when we talk about crime against women, it would be unfortunate if I compel you to somewhere compare the rape of women or violence against women and the numbers emanating, let's say, from the United States and compare that to India. It would be extremely inhuman. But what we can speak about is that how do you facilitate administratively systems across the country, because law and order is a state issue, to ensure that women are better protected. In our country, before the BJP came to power, post 2014, we did not have a single crisis center to address issues of women in districts in the country. The first ever one-stop crisis center came into existence post 2017. Today, we have 704 such centers working in 704 districts. In this budget, we have pronounced 300 new one-stop centers. We have 35 women's helplines which are currently functional. And together between these centers and helplines, we have in the past 3 years helped 7 million women. Now, apart from that, for the first time, we have ensured that every district has an anti-human trafficking unit. We have also ensured that every police station now has a women's help desk. We are currently undertaking, in collaboration with state governments, because law and order is a state issue, to ensure that these police personnel and administrative personnel are gender sensitized and trained to better serve the needs of women and children.
That's really, really good to know. As somebody who is super concerned about women's issues, I'm really glad to hear that. Over to Pratyush for the next question.
Thanks for sharing, Ms. Irani, about the developments we did make during the pandemic and how door-to-door delivery and everything was a reality. But I beg to differ that it was a reality only for half of the India. We saw migrant workers traveling from cities to villages, the whole chaos of them not being able to reach their own villages. We saw the hospitals were overflowing. The people were literally making community measures to help each other, and that was where we are. That was where we were. So what has the government learned out of pandemic in form of policy changes that need to happen to ensure this doesn't happen, just to be well prepared for maybe fourth wave if there is? I hope that's not true, but what are the learnings the government has generated coming out of the pandemic?
Pratyush, I think one of the greatest models for comparatives is the constituency that I represent, which is Amethi, where the Gandhi family held the threads of power for 50 years consistently as individuals, let alone the governments that they led. Mr. Rahul Gandhi was a 3-time MP from the area. He never set up a single oxygen plant, neither did his mother, not his father, not his grandmother. I've had, again, the privilege of ensuring Amethi now has 7 oxygen plants. I, in Amethi, did not have a hospital. I did not have a medical college. I did not have the main railway station. In fact, the collector, which is the chief district administrative officer, did not have an office. So yes, the Gandhis left us a huge legacy of a structure that came apart. And piece by piece, these need to be put together, which we are doing in the government. And in my constituency, 70,000 Indians were brought back home through the railway network, through buses. I remember 3 came back from Lakshadweep. So yes, when you're confronted with the largest and the biggest and the most vicious pandemic in 100 years, which does not give you a mandate or a prescription for how it is to be addressed, and you have a system that a political family did not maybe ready your country for, then yes, you meet those challenges with everyday solutions. So I think that when you say that it is easy to scoff off at doorstep delivery for 800 million Indians, for 25 continuous months. Try it once at the campus. For 25 months, go and ensure, can you deliver and then digitally track that? It is a massive administrative exercise. It is not being done anywhere in the world. So yes, we have delivered solutions. Yes, we have been confronted with challenges. But yes, we have tried to address those challenges in participation and in collaboration with citizens and with state governments at large. Do remember that when the pandemic struck, we are a nation of 1.3 billion, as you said. Our first and foremost responsibility was to ensure that the virus does not spread. You remember the kind of internationalization that the opposition tried with regards to the vaccine. We had an active opposition telling citizens in our country, do not vaccinate yourself. The Gandhis were at the forefront. Akhilesh Yadav was at the forefront. Mr. Rahul Gandhi kept on telling Indians that the vaccine can never be made in India. So instead of a responsible opposition, we had an opposition that wanted to tear our country apart, instill fear in our citizens. Irrespective of that, we had our citizens respond and, like I said, help in ensuring that our system stays afloat. We are today in a position, as you said, if God forbid there is a fourth wave, we are in a position of ensuring that in collaboration with state governments, again, since health is a state subject, the national capital does not have a government of the Bharatiya Janata Party, but an opposition leader who has been servicing the needs of the national capital through a government of the other opposition party. And that is why we are in constant communication with state governments to ensure that the needs of the citizens are met. But like I said, I reiterate, we had an active opposition led by Sri Rahul Gandhi and Sonia Gandhi telling people, do not vaccinate yourself. Telling people, do not believe in the Indian vaccine. Telling people India doesn't have the capacity to manufacture a vaccine. As Indian, I am very proud of the fact that not only did we service the vaccination needs and the pharmacological needs of Indians from our country, we actually, as a part of the Maitri program of the Ministry of External Affairs, ensured that 166 countries receive pharmacological and vaccine support from India.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Irani. And it was a great pleasure learning about all the policies that you've implemented during your tenure. Owing to the fact that you're one of the most prominent faces in the Indian government at the moment, we guys are really curious to know, would we ever get a chance to see you running for the Prime Minister's office in the future?
I think, Arushi, these issues are so premature that you almost make me sound like a member of the Gandhi family. That to vie for the highest office in the country is not the birthright of only those who are in positions of power. The Narendra Modi story is a manifestation of the power of the common Indian who can aspire to one of the highest positions of service and not privilege. And I think that the myth that power will be restrained or contained only by a political few is a myth that is now shattered in Indian polity. But by the virtue of your popularity and whether you have the correct political genes, you somehow become the front runner, I think is now not a political reality in our country. You have to consistently persevere through administration to receive the adulation of people. It is definitely not being easy being Narendra Modi. It is definitely not easy to come to the speaker series at India at Berkeley, to be demonized, to be called out names, however, yet engaging in a conversation that has been respectful. I know that I came here after much confrontation within many members that you've been politely enough to respond to and still invite me on this platform to speak. But I'm not ignorant of the attacks that have transpired on Twitter on me. The fact that I am to be attacked with prejudice before I was even heard tells you how illiberal those who claim to be Democrats are. There is a gentleman called Ashok Chatterjee on your chat. He says that I demonize the Gandhi families. I think he should once visit Amethi and see how 25 lakh people were left to a miserable future by a political brat.
There are more people like Ashok Chatterjee who like to voice their opinions. So I suggest we move on to audience question and answers. The floor is open for question and answers, and we'll be moving into that. Thank you.
But sorry, my question is actually about divorce. Studies have shown that India actually has one of the lowest divorce rates in the world, where you have better figures that something around 13 out of 1,000 compared to divorce in India, so it's very low. I was wondering what your thoughts about this and what you think are the main reasons for this trend. And some women's rights have brought up the fact that low divorce rates actually correlate with poor women's rights. For example, a woman in an abusive marriage can't get out. So I was wondering what your thoughts are on that and what your overall thoughts on divorce in India.
Meghna, I think you were cutting off and we could not hear your question properly. So I can just read the question that you sent us as well, just for more clarity.
Can you hear me now? Is this better?
I think your voice is still choppy. Can I just read your question out once again? So it might be.
Thank you.
Meghna's question was, some studies note that India has lowest divorce rate in the world. Figures vary, but some studies show that out of 1,000 marriages in India, only 13 result in divorce. What do you think are the main reasons for this? Furthermore, some people argue that this low divorce rate is actually detrimental for women's rights. That women who are facing domestic violence at home are unable to leave an unsafe marriage, and that divorced women are stigmatized by society. Do you agree with this? What are your thoughts about India's divorce rate?
I don't think, Meghna, that the divorce rate being low is an indication that more women are being domestically violated and hence they are not in some way free to leave marriages. I think culturally today in India, if a woman has to make the decision of leaving her marriage, she is in no way culturally or societally wished ill, or for that matter, demonized. I think that if there is a state of affairs where data indicates that women are subsisting in happy marriages, then let it be so. Insofar as domestic violence goes, I think that we have administratively now trying to create a more robust system so that every district has a responsive protection officer, especially when it comes to implementation of the prevention of domestic violence. And I'm also of the belief that when we do programs such as the one-stop center that I spoke of in my response to Arushi, one of the tenets of it is to ensure that through NIMHANS, which is the premier National Institute for Mental Health, we reach out and cultivate an environment of more and more sensitive administrative response to women in such need. We are currently running an entire program of training of all personnel, including those who would possibly open even the door to the center for women who are victims of violence domestically. We intend to now make sure that our helpline services for mental health support is now made available to women across all Anganwadi systems. We also have a mental health helpline which has been proffered by the Ministry of Health separately, which is specially being accessed by Indians during the pandemic. So our endeavor is that in association with universities and colleges, we come out more and more with deliberations and conversations around the prevention of domestic violence, enhanced reporting of domestic violence, and ensure that there is societal intervention and familial intervention when it comes to such cases. Because we have reached out to society at large and said that the issue of domestic violence does not get restricted to the woman who is victimized. It also finds a reflection on the mental health of the child who is a witness to such violence at home.
Thank you for that answer. I think the next person we have is Anushka Puru.
Hello, Mrs. Irani. My name is Anushka. It's a pleasure to be hearing from you today. My question is a little bit more about your work, government, and your transition in power, less so about the politics which we have been discussing so far. You successfully converted the constituency of Amethi, which had been a Gandhi family bastion for a very long time. So it would be great to hear some insights into how you really understood the pulse of Amethi's people and what led up to your historic victory in the constituency. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anushka. I think that there are 2-3 things which were extremely prominent when I came to Amethi 8 years ago. There was a citizen's desire to throw out the Gandhi family. And that is because the discourse started in the country that politics is a medium of servicing the people's need and not a medium so that family bastions can stay afloat. If you remember, Atal Bihari Vajpayee brought together for the first time in electoral politics the discourse of Bijli Sadak Pani. And Narendra Modi as Chief Minister gave momentum to it. And he said that if citizens want to vote, let that emotion of caste not be a factor. Let the emotion of a political family not be a factor. See what governments can do for you as an individual and for the family that you care for. And that is why basic needs such as housing, electricity, roads, infrastructure, education became the mainstay of political discourse. And when I went to Amethi 8 years ago, Amethi did not have, like I said in one of my responses earlier, did not have the district collector's office, did not have the chief education officer's office, did not have, in fact, I had the privilege of introducing the first ever CT scan to Amethi. I had the privilege of bringing the first ever fertilizer rack to Amethi. I had the privilege of bringing for the first time ever a soil testing lab to Amethi. We had over 100,000 families that did not have an electrical connection. Now, this is a bastion of a family that ruled the roots at the center and at the state, which means that if they so desired, these administrative deliverables could have been given to the people of Amethi. There was an issue of 30 years of pendency of one medical college, which was never opened. There was an issue of even a bypass from a highway that connected both Amethi Raebareli to the state capital, which was not serviced. So now imagine issues pending for 30-40 years and a non-responsive politician. Now this is a gentleman who would come once every 5 years just to proffer or procure votes. And that is why when the people of Amethi saw a churn across the country where citizens were asking their Sansads or their MPs to be more responsive, here Amethi was hunting for their MP because he was missing in action. So yes, in 2014, when I fought the election for the first time from Amethi, I had only 21 days. But in those 21 days, BJP had never clocked more than 30,000 votes. But in those 21 days, we clocked 3 lakh votes, which was a great indication that people were desperate for change. People were desperate for administrative services. Now, there was no guarantee I would get the ticket again. However, I had made a promise to the people that irrespective of whether I lose, I will stay back and work for them. There was a village, Pipri, which decided not to vote in 2014. They said, we are banishing the vote here because we've been asking for 60 years that our soil is getting eroded into the river. We need an embankment that can protect our homes and our villages. Nobody has heard us. Nobody's come ever to us, including our member of parliament. And I remember telling the people of Pipri, I understand if you want to banish the vote and do not want to vote for any political party, but post the election, I will come back. Now, for 60 years, you don't build an embankment. I had again the opportunity of servicing the needs of that village. So brick by brick, step by step, when you start delivering on issues of, I think, administration, people do recognize the spirit of democracy. And they want then an active politician or a member of parliament to sit there and listen to them. Now, I became one of the first, in fact, recently we had the member of Legislative Council elections. Can you imagine, I became the first sitting MP of Amethi who voted. The MP of Amethi never voted for an election for the people's representative. I became the first MP of Amethi who stays in the constituency. I became the first MP of Amethi who actually went to every panchayat. So this was an area hungry for change. And that is why I went out of context when I spoke about Mr. Chatterjee's remarks on the chat. That's because it's been 8 years of witnessing the damage done to people's aspirations and generations that were lost because they were not given an opportunity in a space they were born to.
Thanks for sharing your thanks for sharing your experiences with Amethi. We have Aparajita next.
Thank you so much. Good evening, ma'am. Thank you for gracing the occasion at Berkeley. I have two questions. One is that you've been a former minister of HRD in India, and now you are Minister of Women and Child Development. Muslim women in Karnataka, a BJP ruled state, have faced discrimination. What would be termed discrimination under Article 15 of the Indian Constitution for their clothing. This is not the first time Muslim women or women of any kind in Karnataka have faced problems. So we know that even pre-BJP there were issues, but it has escalated to a level where women are told to leave the classroom. As a former minister of HRD and of Women and Child Development, how would you comment on this? Also, how do you think the rights of women to love men of any of another religion, especially Muslim men, been treated by your government? I ask again because basically to ask, how does the BJP government understand Indian women's choices to study, to dress, or to love, regardless of whatever religion they belong to? Thank you. Thanks so much.
The name of the speaker?
That does not.
Beg your pardon? Okay, so I think the irony shouldn't be missed that I am a minister who's married to somebody outside my community. So if the BJP was diffident about Hindu women marrying outside the community, I would not be minister, would I? And I must take you back to, let's say, my own experiences. I studied in a convent school in Delhi. As a student, I was not allowed the tika that I wear. As a student, I was not allowed roli. In fact, if there was mehndi on our hands, we were sent back home. Now, when you conform yourself to an academic institution, you have to comply with the rules and regulation of that institution. The article of law is settled by the Indian courts already on this issue. Insofar as choice to love, like I said, choice to marry, I'm married outside the Hindu community. So when you ask about the BJP's point of view about what choices women make, I think it's more than clear. Constitutionally, it's your right to love, marry whoever you deem fit. But when you talk about relationships where a man defrauds a woman, impregnates her, leaves her on the streets, and says talaq, 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 does not give her alimony and the rights as prescribed by the Constitution, then should a woman have the right to seek the recourse of justice for the fraud committed on her? Absolutely. Does not matter what is the religion of the man concerned. And if the Bharatiya Janata Party stands up for such a woman, should then the polity be demonized for protecting the rights of women who do not want to be defrauded in a relationship? So when we did away with the triple talaq, did we speak up for justice for Muslim women? Absolutely. Scores of Muslim women were left in drudgery, were abandoned with their children by a man just pronouncing talaq thrice. So now we've made it illegal for a Muslim woman to be abandoned. The Congress government didn't do it because they were fearful of the vote bank backlash. Women in India, Muslim women, were compelled to take holy travels unless they were accompanied by a man, which was not necessitated by religious scripture. The BJP said women cannot be compelled to travel only if they have male company. So if we have reviewed and removed these obstacles on the path of Muslim women, should we be demonized? The Indian government, for the first time in the history of our education policy, now has a gender inclusion fund. It never happened before. And I think one of the greatest tests of how women respond is also how they vote. We recently had state elections, and women overwhelmingly supported the Bharatiya Janata Party, especially in the state of Uttar Pradesh, where women's issues were at the forefront, including security of women. And in support of the BJP and its administration of law and order, especially with regards to protection of young girls and women, women overwhelmingly supported the Bharatiya Janata Party. So I think the people have spoken.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Nandini, and it's an honor to hear you speak today. You started your acting career in the late 90s, and then you joined the BJP in 2003. Given that the audience today are college students, I was wondering, what advice do you have for women starting their careers?
I don't know, Nandini, why women always seek advice. I've never seen a man ask for advice from any other man. So I think my advice for women is stop asking for advice. Women are well equipped to make decisions on the basis of information that is available to them. I would say that I did what I did because I believed in what I was about to do, that I believed in my own sense of self, that I believed that yes, no matter what I do, there will be consequentially either failure or success. And if I fail, then either I learn for it and equip myself better to readdress the same issue, because I'm not a quitter. So I think, Nandini, for men and women, it is important. Make your own life decisions because you are responsible for what transpires next. And be happy. Money does not get it. Fame does not get it. You need not conform to other people's idea of you. As long as you're happy and satisfied with who you are and where you want to be, that I think is good enough for your subsistence. So my best wishes, Nandini.
Thank you so much for your insight, ma'am. Thank you.
So, Minister, thank you for being here today. I am sure you can see that around the country today, there are open calls for genocide against Muslims. There are open calls, public calls for Muslim women to be raped. There are anti-conversion laws being passed across this country. Muslims are being lynched on the streets. Festivals at which Hindus and Muslims have worshipped for over 1300 years, Muslims are now being banned from. There is an open call for the economic boycott of Muslims. There are full-scale attacks against Dalits. I really would like to know, Minister, what your government is doing about this. In many, many cases, BJP ministers are being seen at these events. The Prime Minister has not made a single comment on the rising waves of anti-minority violence in this country. Your government has jailed and beaten activists, intellectuals, and academics. There is a complete climate of fear in the country today where anyone who dares to ask a question, and I would really like the minister to answer this question.
The fact that you pose many fallacies on this platform need to be denounced. When you say Muslims worship with Hindus in a Hindu temple, are you saying that Islam allows idol worshipping? Would you want to force Muslims to idol worship in India? Secondly, there is absolutely no minister in the Modi government who has partaken in any incident that breaks the law. Would you look at the subway shootings and say that this is a manifestation of the state's will in the United States of America? If there are incidents of law and order, as I have enunciated before, law and order being a state issue, the law, the due process of it, including our courts, are adept enough to address these issues of law. But for you to propagate that a religion which does not believe in idol worship needs to worship idols in India is nothing but Islamophobia, Aarti. I also believe that when you use terms such as genocide, I wonder why you are absolutely quiet on the fact that Kashmiri Pandits were driven out of their homeland by Pak-sponsored terrorism, and not a word was spoken. The community I am married into was driven out of their homeland by terrorists and Islamists, and not a word is spoken of the Parsi community. That when we are confronted with issues of law and order, how come those issues where Hindu women are told that come out of our houses and let us rape you never get reported by you on platforms such as Berkeley? So instead of inciting religious violence and Hindu phobia on the campus, my request to you is to, in some way, if you do find that modicum of respect for the Indian Constitution and law, recognize that the law punishes those who try to break those very tenets of humanity. In 1984, in our country, Sikhs were massacred at the political direction of the Gandhi family. For 36 years, this micro-minority in our country was devoid of justice. Prime Minister Modi directed that all cases be reopened and the Sikh community receive justice. Today, those cases not only have been reopened, but those who massacred the Sikhs in our country are being brought to justice. So the wheels of justice do turn when the political establishment is bereft of religious prejudice. The fact again that today we have a prime minister who has freed Muslim women from the shackles of triple talaq is something that possibly escapes you. But again, my gratitude that you were more civil than Patrick. However, I will contest the fallacy that you have proffered on this platform.
Thank you everyone for your questions. Unfortunately, the session has to end, so time has elapsed. But again, once again, thank you so much, Mrs. Irani, for taking out the time and addressing all questions in great detail. SSIB is honored to facilitate this discussion, and we hope to continue providing a platform for Indian leaders to connect with students, faculty, and general public, and just have such deliberations and talk about different ideas and policies. So everyone, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.